Researchers at UC Santa Cruz and UC Davis detected an avian flu outbreak among the population of elephant seals at the Año Nuevo State Park and Reserve. So on today's episode of Science Solutions Santa Cruz, I sit down with Patrick Robinson, director of the Año Nuevo Reserve, to talk about everything that's going on and what happens next. I'm Jonathan Hicken. Enjoy. Welcome to Science Solutions Santa Cruz. We're so lucky to have Patrick Robinson with us today. He is the director of the Año Nuevo Reserve, just about 20 miles north of you here. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you so much.
So, we got something going down at Año Nuevo these days. Is that right?
It's been an interesting 10 days here.
Yeah. What's going on?
We have a avian influenza outbreak amongst the elephant seals. So this has been going on for a little while. In terms of the seabirds along the coast here in small numbers. And just about 10 days ago, we confirmed that it was in the elephant seal population, which is a pretty big deal because switching from marine birds over to marine mammals is a big change. So it's a little bit scary.
Okay, did I hear you correctly that you detected it in the birds first at Año Nuevo?
Well, there have been other researchers studying the flow of avian influenza in seabirds prior to this. So that's not that new. Avian influenza has been around for many years. It's gone around the world. It's affected many populations of seabirds. And a couple of years ago, it went into the southern elephant seal population and caused massive mayhem, near complete death of new cohorts. So like the pups of the given year in a certain colony, almost all of them died. So huge impacts in southern elephant seals, which is why elephant seal researchers like myself were very scared about it entering the northern elephant seal population.
And it's here.
And it's here now.
It's here. Okay, so let me get this straight. So there's southern elephant seals, northern elephant seals. Where are the southern elephant seals exactly, or more or less?
Yeah, they have a circumpolar distribution around the subantarctic.
Okay.
So they're in South America and other subantarctic islands. So definitely southern hemisphere, very far away. There are a couple of weird animals that have ventured farther north, but very different than the northern elephant seals, which exist along the California coast and Mexican coast, and then venture off to sea from there.
Okay. And so a couple years ago, researchers detected the avian flu in that population. And what was the impact down there?
So this is 3 or 4 years ago. Down in South America, I believe the first outbreak happened down there in the Peninsula Valdez, so along the Argentinian coastline, and just huge impacts on the population there. Nearly all of the pups died in a given year. So really bad. I think it was like 95% of the pups. And so you can imagine the demographic impacts that has on that population. And they think that there were a fair number of females, adult females that died as well. And that's a pretty big deal because those are the adult females, especially, are the ones that sustain the population. So that had probably decades and decades of impact on that population before they can recover.
Do we know, have we heard anything from researchers down there about how that population is doing, or if there's been a rebound, or kind of what we know about the longer term impacts of it?
I think there have been some papers published. I'm not super familiar with those, but in short, it is going to be decades until they can recover to normal numbers.
Okay.
So of particular importance, though, is the adult females. Those numbers were quite a bit down, but they weren't seeing those on land as carcasses. So potentially a lot of those animals were dying out at sea. It's the young ones, the weanlings, that we're seeing in great numbers on the mainland.
Is there any connection between the outbreak down there and what's happening here? Maybe, or do we not know yet? What is it? Just coincidence that there is avian flu there and now here?
Well, avian influenza has spread all around the world.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ubiquitous, and it's mostly transmitted through birds. Obviously, avian influenza.
Yeah.
But what's notable is when it transfers over to different species, infects other species, and it can have variable effects in those other species. So northern elephant seals are different than southern elephant seals, but they're closely related. So we don't really know before this. We didn't know how that would impact northern elephant seal populations. And this is sort of a natural experiment. We're watching it unfold before us. And after seeing indirectly what had happened to the southern elephant seal population, we were very worried about the potential devastation that would have up here. So far, we haven't seen that. We've
Okay,
just
that's a
seen
relief.
minor effects, but we're still very worried. This is very early in the process, and so we don't know fully what's going to happen over the next week, over the next month, over the next year. So still a lot of unknowns.
And and I'll get to kind of what the effort to track what's happening and deeply understand what's going on in just a minute. But how does a virus from a bird transfer to a nearly a ton weighing elephant seal?
So the way that they transfer that disease is actually not super well understood.
Okay, interesting.
Because that's a very rare event, and it's very hard for researchers to study that. So I'll point out with a lot of this that I'm not a disease expert.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm an elephant seal expert, but I've learned a lot over the past 10 days about this. So hopefully I'm semi-knowledgeable. But yeah, so there can be a few different ways. We think that it's not aerosolized in the same way that we think of flu. Like, if we were both, let's say you were infected with the flu and you coughed in my direction and then I could get it. So that's one direct way, but indirect ways are also possible. So if, let's say, a seabird defecates, deposits some guano on the beach, and then an elephant seal goes past that and it ingests some of it, which is entirely possible because the elephant seals are going along on the ground and shoving their noses in the sand all the time.
Sure.
So that oral fecal route is definitely possible with those guys. So at Año Nuevo, we have several seabird populations, especially at Año Nuevo Island. And so we have a lot of seabirds around. And so it's very likely, again, we don't know for sure, but very likely that those seabirds transmitted it potentially through guano or some sort of direct contact. Possibly through carcasses as well. So when seabirds get this disease, they can die, and then the carcasses are laying on the beach, and elephant seals can directly touch those carcasses and infect themselves from that. So a few different ways, but it's hard to know for sure.
We don't really know, but I mean, generally speaking, we have a sense of how these diseases transfer between animals. And so there's a couple of ways that it might be, but I don't know. I wonder if it even really matters how it's being transferred. But I don't know. Maybe that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, there's sort of several interesting avenues here. So one of the interesting things is studying the disease dynamics, because that helps us understand how this disease might infect new populations or new species. But then there's also just the human health aspect. So we want to know more about this species and how this virus gets into a new species, because it might eventually get to us in a very virulent fashion. So it could evolve into a more virulent disease, and we would want to know that. So, the health department and everything is very interested in monitoring this. And if there are any human cases, that would be very noteworthy. Up to date, there have not been very many human cases of the H5N1.
Like anywhere?
Not very many. So largely in like chicken farms and areas where people are very, very heavily exposed to a large number of infected birds, but just members of the public walking around in an area where there are seagulls and other species like that, not much of an impact.
Okay, so you're the director of the Año Nuevo Reserve. So I kind of want to do a like pre-pandemic like knowledge and post-pandemic knowledge, like day in the life. So what is the director of the Año Nuevo State Park, or not State Park, excuse me, Año Nuevo Reserve? Mm-hmm. What is your responsibility? What does work like, or what did it look like 10 days ago and before?
Yeah, so my main job is to facilitate research, teaching, and outreach activities for the university at that reserve. So we have a unique partnership there. A lot of the natural reserves that are part of the UC Natural Reserve System around the state are owned by the UC. So like the land and the buildings, everything is owned by the University of California. Año Nuevo is a little bit different. It's one of the oldest of the natural reserves, but we have a cooperative agreement with the state park. So the state park owns the land and the buildings and all that, but we just have an agreement with them to operate a research program and outreach activities within that. So it's my job to interface with all of the researchers, which are mostly elephant seal researchers, but we have some sea lion and seabird research as well, and some growing number of inland work as well. And so facilitate all that, and class visits, and getting people out there and understanding what research is going on and getting a larger and larger number of those people involved in actual research, which is really fun.
And so, most of us know Año Nuevo because we've gone on these walking tours out to the beach and gotten to get, up close look at these incredible animals. So how do you interface with the state park in terms of those public tours?
So we're sort of in a different area. A lot of the
Okay.
research activities happen on the beach, where the public visitors aren't allowed to go. So we're just like a little bit closer to the animals because we have all sorts of fancy research permits to do that. And we actually work most of the time outside of public tour hours, in large part because the work that we do can very easily be misinterpreted. So, if we're disturbing a seal in order to do a research activity, if someone's video recording that, they can make that look inappropriate without proper context.
Yeah, understood.
So that's part of the agreement that we have with the state park, is to work outside of public tour hours. So that means a lot of early mornings for the research teams, like getting there before dawn and then exiting by about 10 a.m. So what it means to be an elephant seal researcher at Año Nuevo Reserve is waking up sometimes before 5 a.m.
I had the distinct privilege of being on a dolphin research team for a few months in Western Australia. And yeah, it was like 4 a.m. Days, back by 11. And then you spend the rest of the day working on the data. So yeah, it's grueling. So shout out to all the researchers out there. It's tough work.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you learned about what was going on and you had to close down the tours, right? So the public tours out to the beach are not happening at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So I believe it was a week ago Thursday that we were out. Strangely enough, we were actually doing an avian influenza survey. So researchers at UC Davis and Professor Beltran here at UC Santa Cruz had a collaboration going, and I was helping out with that, where we were monitoring like carcasses. And it's a little bit morbid to think about, but at a breeding colony, there are often carcasses around. There's a natural amount of death that happens. And so we would get an occasional bird carcass, an occasional California sea lion carcass wash up. And over the past year or two, we've been going out occasionally and sampling those animals. So just a simple swab, put in a little vial with a special solution to preserve the RNA, goes off to a lab and they test it and almost always come back negative. And then on this particular day, we were going out and doing one of these surveys, and we noticed that there was one dead elephant seal weanling. And that's not entirely abnormal. Like during the breeding season, we have a number of animals that die. It was a little bit odd that this particular animal was in good body condition. So usually it's the starving pups that get separated from their mothers that pass away. So that was a little bit odd. And we walked a little bit further and saw one animal that was actually having spasms or convulsions. And again, that's something that we've seen before in a very, very small number of animals. But to see those two things right back to back was noteworthy to us. And then we came back the next morning as part of the normal research program. A lot of different things going on that morning. Professor Beltran was deploying a satellite tag. Her team was out doing that. We were doing flipper tag and mark resites. There's all the normal things that we do. And we noticed several additional animals, either dead or convulsing like that. And so at that point, we knew probably something was going on. So we did some additional sampling, brought in additional researchers, and they were able to run those tests and determine that that, in fact, was avian influenza in those small number of animals.
Okay, so walk us through kind of this like first response. What actually happened? Who came to the scene? What is everybody's roles? Like, what are we doing right now?
Yeah, so the first thing was just collecting some samples. So fortunately, because of the collaboration that UC Santa Cruz had with UC Davis, UC Davis are disease experts.
Okay.
So this is part of the Center for Pandemic Insights, led by Chris Johnson, and her graduate student, Lizzie Ashley, who's been working with us for a bit. And she basically had us trained up on proper personal protective equipment and proper sampling techniques for this exact situation. So they didn't necessarily expect this to happen, but they knew it was a possibility. So we were kind of ready to sample for this. And so we had all the materials necessary to, the swabs and the vials and everything ready to go. So we sampled some of the animals. And then it was actually on that Friday, it's a little over a week ago Friday, we collected those samples and let the folks at UC Davis know about this. And they thought it was highly suspect. This is very abnormal to see this many animals with those sorts of symptoms. And so they thought this might be an outbreak. And so they said, it'd be great if you can get us those samples. right away. And so we came back from the field, and one of the Beltran Lab undergraduates, bless her heart, drove all the way to UC Davis to
Oh
drop
my
off the
gosh.
samples.
Okay.
And they processed those samples very quickly. Normally, it takes a couple of weeks for them to process these samples, and they got results back within that day. So they recognized the importance of this, particularly because it was jumping species. So that's a very noteworthy thing. And so they processed those samples right away, and they later needed to be confirmed by a federal lab. So they give us a non-negative result. So it's not exactly positive, but it's not negative.
Sure.
So highly suspect. And then they get confirmation of that from the federal lab. And so we didn't know right away that it was confirmed, but we knew right away that it was non-negative. And so,
Which is kind of code for like, this is, I mean, it needed to be verified, but like at that moment, you kind of knew what was going on.
we knew it was very likely.
Yeah.
So not 100%, but we knew it was likely. And so at that point, we reached out to the state park and said, okay, we have this possible outbreak. We don't really know what that means in terms of the number of animals affected, the risk to the public. And so at that point, the state park decided to modify their tours. So we had a meeting between myself, folks at UC Davis, and the state parks, and they decided to modify their tours a little bit to stay further away from the seals on that Saturday. This is just one day, less than one day after those non-negative results. And then the following day, after the consultation with him again, they decided to shut down tours for a week. And then as we learned more and saw that more animals were potentially being impacted, they decided to shut down the tours for the rest of the season. It is a pretty big deal because lots of people like those tours, and it's thousands of people.
And this is like one of the busiest times of year, or a lot, at least it was in January, February, right? So
yeah, the breeding season is everyone's favorite time to come out because that's when the pups are born. Pups are the cute ones, of course. Got the big males fighting. So just lots of fun activity out there. So it's a bummer that that isn't available for people to see right now.
How did you personally, I mean, you've spent how many years now at Año Nuevo?
So I was actually an undergraduate researcher here at UC Santa Cruz, and Año Nuevo was my first real field experience. So
Incredible.
I got to go with Pat Morris out to Año Nuevo Island to study the sea lions out there. And that was back in 2001. So, about 25 years now.
Wow, that's incredible, Patrick. So I mean, you've gotten to know these animals over 25 years, right? And you've gotten to know this colony. First of all, can you recognize any individuals? Like, do you know any individuals?
I'm not as good as some folks.
Okay.
So other researchers like Carolyn Casey, who study the acoustics, she can actually recognize the calls of some animals from a distance, which is pretty fun.
Yeah.
But we give them flipper tags and marks, so that helps us identify them uniquely.
So how did you, I mean, given that you have 25 years of time with this colony, and how does it feel like right now in this moment? Kind of what is happening?
Yeah, it's honestly just quite sad, to see this population be very steady through time. I mean, we've gone through COVID and different political, happenings and things like that. But elephant seals were our reliable, um, source of, solidarity. And to see them potentially be affected is pretty sad. We were very worried that we would see some of the same results that they got down in the southern elephant seal population. So when we first started seeing animals dying from this, we were very worried it would go down a similar path. But fortunately, it hasn't. And so it's still a very small fraction of the population. So we were initially very sad that it had entered, and now it's looking more hopeful, which is really nice.
And what gives you this hope?
Just seeing that trajectory. So we have those original 7 non-negatives, which have been confirmed now, so we can call them positives.
Okay.
And we've seen some additional deaths of animals, but a very small number, and it's been kind of steady through time. And in the southern elephant seals and in other outbreak situations where there is like mammal to mammal transfer, then we see an exponential increase. So that first day we saw maybe 2 that were impacted. We didn't test those animals, so we don't know for sure. And then the next day, 7 to 10, something like that. And then if we would then the next day have seen 50 and the next day 100, then that would have been this catastrophic exponential loss. And we didn't see that. The highest number of impacted animals was actually that second day, and then it's been lower since then. But we don't know for sure because a lot of this testing hasn't come back yet. So all we know for sure right now are those 7 initial cases. But we've had a small number of additional deaths that we suspect are positives. But the labs don't test that quickly, except for, in that first day, and so we're still waiting on a lot of those results.
If you haven't visited the Seymour Marine Discovery Center at UC Santa Cruz in a while, or ever, you really should come visit us. We are right on the bluffs of the beautiful Monterey Bay, with an aquarium full of local species and a bunch of hands-on science exhibits that help you understand what's happening in our ocean and along our coast. We are connecting the incredible research happening at UC Santa Cruz with real-world solutions for our coastal community. We don't want science to just sit on a shelf. We want it to shape decisions, inspire kids, and help our community feel equipped to act. So if you care about the future of our ocean and our coastal community, or you just want to experience a place that makes you feel a little more connected to it, come visit us at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. Science Solutions, Santa Cruz. We're having this conversation 10 days after you first learned what was going on. So there's a lot of unknowns, but it sounds to me like in other cases, maybe the one in the southern elephant seal population, that we saw that exponential impact happen pretty quickly. We're not seeing that now. I imagine that's not to say that it couldn't turn, but that's at least not what's happening yet.
Yeah, so anything's possible, and that's what the folks at UC Davis, those disease experts in the Center for Pandemic Insights, tell us a lot. So when we ask them questions about, is it safe for the public to be out there, they will not say yes or no. They will say that, well, this is a new situation. There had to be some evolution in the virus, probably for it to go into a new species, and so they're not sure how virulent that is, how easily it can spread. We're not sure if all of the cases we've detected so far are bird to elephant seal transmission, or if there are elephant seal to elephant seal transmissions. So we don't know a lot. And fortunately,
is there any way to know that?
There is. Unfortunately, It takes a lot of time.
Okay.
So the samples that we're collecting now will be analyzed and sequenced. And then what's really cool is that they can basically put that evolutionary pathway back together. And if all of the elephant seals that are infected go back to a single genotype, basically, then it might have been just one bird that infected that first seal, and then it could spread from there. So they'll be able to figure out, if it was mammal to mammal or bird to mammal, potentially how many birds were involved in that. So a lot of questions can be answered, but it takes a long time to get all the sequence data and properly analyzed.
That's far out.
Yeah.
So I know that UCSC has a genomics institute. Are they involved in any of this work, or is it just between UC Davis and the elephant seal researchers here?
Currently, as far as I know, I'm just UC Santa Cruz elephant seal researchers, and then the UC Davis Center for Pandemic Insights, and then a growing number of other folks are involved in various other ways. So different state and federal and local institutions, everything from the Department of Health all the way up to NOAA. Are involved in some capacity, but mostly in just sort of managing the outbreak and ensuring that folks are being safe and that the proper people are being notified and just everything's being done correctly. At the federal level, this is like similar to an oil spill. It's like there's a federal response to it and a whole structure for organizing people around that.
That's fascinating in and of itself. Why is the federal government so interested in this? Or like, why would there even be sort of a federal system for responding to this thing? Like, why is it such a big deal?
Yeah, I think it's because there's the potential for human health impacts.
Okay.
So if this was just, an animal isolated incident, and there was no chance for human involvement, then it would really be of interest just to animal researchers. So because it is a potential human health impact, then there are federal researchers and folks that are interested. And so they keep a close eye on things and facilitate sampling and study designs and things like that so that we can do the best job we can. To be very clear, there's very low possibility for humans to be impacted by this right now, but they're just being very cautious. And so I appreciate that. I mean, I didn't know very much about this going into it and what that federal response would look like. And after seeing that, I'm actually pretty excited by how much a lot of people care about things like this. I honestly had no idea that there were this many people interested in keeping people safe from zoonotic diseases like this.
What was that word you just used?
Zoonotic
What does
diseases.
that mean?
So a disease that is in an animal population that can then be spread to humans.
Okay, okay. So out of an abundance of caution, there's a whole response here, just off the off chance that there might be some human impacts. And so for that reason, I got to imagine that's why we're not doing tours to the beaches right now. We're just trying to keep people away from elephant seals while we learn what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the potential there. Got to keep people safe. One of the things to keep in mind too is that when public tours go out, it's people of all ages, and so you have adults that are just walking on the ground. So and there's the potential to, if the virus is on the ground, with people's shoes, they're called fomites. So any object that can transmit the virus. So people's shoes can transmit that. But also, if you have young kids and they like to play in the sand and they're always putting their hands in their mouth, it's much easier for potentially a young child to contract the disease just from their surroundings than an adult. So they have to be cautious for a variety of reasons.
Are we getting any instructions from UC Davis or the federal bodies that are involved here about how people in the region should be behaving at the beach, like not even at Año Nuevo, but at other beaches where elephant seals or other marine mammals might be present?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we don't know for sure because there's a lot of unknowns about this virus. But there are certain things that we can do to help keep people safe. One of them is on beaches where there are potentially bird or marine mammal carcasses. Super important to keep our pets away. So a lot of people bring dogs to beaches, and of course, dogs are going to go and check out a carcass, and that can be a way to infect the dog and then potentially people beyond that. So that's one way for sure. And then the other way is just to stay away from an area where there are carcasses. Fortunately, that's a fairly natural response to most people. So they're smelling and gross. So hopefully just that alone will keep people away. But, there are people that find dead animals interesting. And so they'll go take a look. And it's just nice to stay away from those in case there is the potential for transmission.
Now, is that any different from what you or what they may have said, say 2 weeks ago? Because if avian flu is around the world, like, shouldn't we always be sort of careful of what our dogs are exploring on the beach?
That's probably good general advice.
Okay, yeah.
In an outbreak scenario where there's a higher proportion of individuals that are testing positive, or I guess just are positive, we don't necessarily test all the animals. But if there's an area where there's an outbreak happening, then a larger proportion of the dead animals or carcasses that a dog would encounter would be problematic. 2 weeks ago, there may have been less of a chance than right now. So we have to keep an eye on that. And so that's why that additional advice is going out to people to stay farther away from those animals.
Back to the response that's happening right now. What happens next? I mean, kind of how does this unfold, and how long is the research going to take here?
Yeah, those are all unknown.
Okay. Yeah.
So it really depends on how this plays out over the coming weeks. So we're continuing to monitor things. So there's not a lot we can do to prevent the spread, which is very unfortunate. It's not like we can go out and build a fence and keep the seabirds away from the seals.
Masks on the elephant seals. Yeah.
There's nothing like that. So really, we're kind of in just a monitoring mode.
Okay.
But that can help us understand some things, and with some additional analysis later on by folks smarter than me, be able to maybe predict how this might act in the future. So lots of valuable stuff to be learned, but it's not going to have an immediate impact on reducing the local spread now.
Is there a world in which this virus becomes sort of part of our ecosystem here, that avian flu and elephant seals just kind of, almost like how COVID is just now kind of one of the diseases we get? Is that a possible path for the elephant seals?
Yeah, I think it's very likely.
Okay.
So the disease becomes endemic in a population. So it's just kind of existing in the population continuously. And one would hope that it would be less virulent, like it would not have the same impact that it would upon the first exposure. But different diseases behave in different ways, so it's a little bit hard to predict. But fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think about it, the southern elephant seals have a head start on us. So we can hopefully get some insight from them about how it will spread and the effects that it'll have on the population.
Is there anything that we could take action on based on what they've learned? Like, is there sort of a decision tree here based on what happened in the southern elephant seal population?
There's nothing really like that we can do
Yeah.
to prevent additional spread. We can make some smart decisions. So, for example, going out to Año Nuevo Island to study the seabirds out there, if we know that a large proportion of the animals out there are infected, which we don't, but if we did know that, then maybe we could do things to minimize disturbance, which would cause additional spread. Keeping people away from carcasses, there's some things that we can do. One of the really exciting things about this particular outbreak is that we detected it very early. And so our collaborators at UC Davis pointed out that this is probably one of the earliest detections of an outbreak of this kind. I'm not going to say the earliest, but it was very early on. Very few animals were impacted when we learned about this. So that helps us get those samples and study those in the future and really get a sense for how these things play out.
That's a testament to the value of these long-standing research sites, right? With decades of work and decades of data and constant presence, is that you were able to do that.
Absolutely. So Professor Beltran at UC Santa Cruz here had formed this collaboration with the UC Davis lab, and that's why we were testing for this in advance. And so we have lots of negative samples from before, but those are valuable. And in addition to that, we have the long-term elephant seal program started by Bernie LeBoeuf in the 1960s.
Sure.
And he carried that on and then passed it on to Dan Costa, and now it's in the process of being transitioned over to the Beltran lab. And that means we have decades and decades of data. So if there's any change in the population because of this, we have just this wealth of information to compare it against and can understand the effects that will have. Of particular importance for this exact moment is that a lot of the animals have been flipper tagged. So we were just in the process of putting flipper tags, unique identifiers, in a lot of the young of the year animals, so the pups or weanlings from this past breeding season. And so we were still planning on doing more of that. So it's a lower number than in previous years, which is kind of a bummer that we're missing out on that. But it's still, I think it was about 250 weanlings that have flipper tags in them. And so some of those we think were have gone on to die potentially from this. And so we can learn something about what's going on based on those individual histories. And that's going to, again, take more time to sort out in greater detail. But that's a really unique thing. Most of these types of studies, you don't have the ability to follow individuals and their trajectory from becoming sick and being healthy before that. So we have that ability now.
That sounds incredibly powerful. And I wonder what can we learn that's unique from, say, a site that doesn't have this history of tagging and tracking?
Yeah, so just as one example, for many of the animals that we put flipper tags in that are pups or weanlings of the year, so we often know who their mother was. And so it could be that older mothers produce pups that are more resistant to a disease like avian influenza, or maybe the younger mothers don't have the immune response, and maybe the pups that exist on the edge of the harems as opposed to the center of the harems can be more easily exposed. There's a lot of really interesting questions when we know so much about this, and it's because of these long-term data sets that we know some of these things. So we're monitoring on a near daily basis these animals under normal conditions, and so we know a lot about these particular pups and weanlings, and can go back and look at that.
So Dr. Beltran deploys tags on elephant seals for a number of reasons, and she talks about elephant seals as being these sentinels for, sort of like, and almost like research partners when they go out. They got these tags on and they collect a lot of data. We won't get into the science there. Maybe I can ask Dr. Beltran those questions another day on another episode. But I wonder, is there any value in that methodology that she deploys for understanding what's going on in this situation?
So what's really neat is that she's actually put together some really nice analyses showing basically the proportion of the adult females that had already left the beach. So this happened all during the end of the breeding season. And so the majority of the adult females had actually departed already, but there was still a good number back, and approximately 25% that had not left yet. But if this was highly impactful to the population, particularly adult females, then it would be very, very fortunate to have 3/4 of the population already gone at that time.
Sure.
So there's things like that we can look at. And then she actually did instrument, I forget the exact number, but more than 10 adult females with satellite tags, timed up recorders, and various other instruments to record their at-sea behavior. And so those are live. I mean, you can go onto the Beltron Web website and click on a button on our main page there and see the live tracking data. And that brings me a lot of hope to see those animals because they're adult females. Those are the most demographically important individuals. And at last check, all of them were cruising along and still
doing their
transmitting.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh man, I just had this like well of relief hearing that they're still out there moving around and doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yep. So keep our fingers crossed for those. But
yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like this is we're kind of there's kind of a multiple stories happening at the same time. It's one of like caution and patience. It's also potentially one of hope and maybe avoidance of something catastrophic. Where are you at this exact moment personally?
The past 10 days have seemed like 2 months. So
Yeah,
it's a lot going on. And my feelings have fluctuated a lot throughout that time. But in general, we've seen relatively few mortalities relative to the size of the population. So seeing how small the impact is relative to southern elephant seals gives me a lot of hope. So we're not seeing that exponential increase in mortalities. So it could still have a big effect. We don't yet know exactly how it's going to impact the adult female population. But as of right now, we have not seen any symptomatic or dead adult females. And so that brings me a lot of hope moving forward here. So even if we still see some symptomatic animals in the future, it's likely not going to have these like decades-long impacts that we've seen in other species.
Do you think that this event is going to change the way that you see or that you interact or you approach your work with these animals?
Well, in the short term, we're going to have to wear some personal protective equipment.
Okay, good for you. So thank you for doing that.
It's going to be a little bit of a different experience to walk amongst the elephant seals and do our research out there.
Being in a closed room with you, I'm really glad to hear that you're wearing your PPE. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah. But yeah, so in the short term, it's probably going to change the way that we do our operation out there a little bit. But beyond that, I don't know. It's fun to think about how resilient this population is and how resilient this species can be. So they went through a population bottleneck 150 years ago. They were hunted to near extinction, and to see them rebound in this amazing way and probably occupy areas that they didn't occupy previously. Año Nuevo, we think, was not one of the areas where they occupied before that bottleneck. So this represents a real conservation success story. And so if they can survive through that and survive this, then I hope that they can survive well into the future.
Well, I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't sure if we were going to hear a really like sort of urgent, scary story here today, or if we were going to hear one of hope. And I'm really glad that this is where you're at, because I'm feeding off of you right now, and so I really appreciate that. Patrick, is there anything else that you want that we haven't had the chance to talk about that you want people in Santa Cruz and listeners to know about what's going on right now?
I think the most important thing is that, as you mentioned before, it's these long-term research programs that enable this monitoring to happen. And if it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't even know that this is going on. And so, science funding is a real issue right now. And so I just ask everyone to support those efforts that facilitate researchers. And there's a lot of really amazing researchers in the Santa Cruz area especially, but really on all over the country, that are going through some really tough times right now in terms of funding limitations. And so I think we just need to continue to knock on the doors of our politicians that represent us and get that science funding so we can do things like this.
Yeah. I encourage listeners to go support. If I'm not mistaken, UC Santa Cruz is running a fundraising campaign right now for this project. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a donor who put up a match, a double or maybe even a triple match for donations that are coming in. Is that right?
The match would be news to me. That's great.
Okay. Yeah.
There's been a number of donations. I believe close to 200 donations, which is great.
That's awesome.
And so that covers everything from personal protective equipment for the researchers going out. This was something that we didn't do before, so we've had to learn a lot about how to implement that, all the way to testing supplies and just all the different things that go into switching this research program a little bit into more monitoring and disease dynamics from the basic ecology that was going on before. So all that helps a lot for sure.
All right. Well, that's Patrick Robinson, director of the Año Nuevo Reserve here on Science Solutions Santa Cruz. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks so much.
All right, thanks to Patrick Robinson for coming in and sitting down with me today. Thanks to Dr. Roxanne Beltran and her team of researchers at UC Santa Cruz that are boots on the ground with the elephant seals. Thanks to the team at UC Davis for your work on the infectious disease side of things. Shout out to all the federal response teams that are involved in this. Thank you to Edith Belmont for editing. Thank you to Annie Smith for distribution. Thank you to Lauren Donnelly Crocker for getting Patrick on tonight's episode. Thanks to Sarah Groff for also getting Patrick in to train our docents tonight. Shout out to the docents who are training. Shout out to all the volunteers at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center and all the volunteers at Año Nuevo State Park. Thanks for listening.